So hi there, thank you for joining us for New Thinking on Cooperative Governance. These are highlights from the International Co-operative Governance Symposium. And it's the Measuring the Cooperative Difference Research Network that is bringing you this webinar as part of our fall series. We've got 3 webinars that comprise our fall series. And we've got about 70 people joining us today live, and lots more who have contacted us who want to receive the recording after so that they can get involved in the dialogue as well. So we're very lucky to have Karen Miner and Sonia Novkovich from St. Mary's University as our featured speakers today. They've been very busy. They just recently organized the International Cooperative Governance Symposium that happened in Halifax just over a week ago. So what they'll do today is highlight for us some of those key things that came out of that conference, and also we'll get an opportunity for those of you who are on the line who did attend to also fill in any gaps or offer your reflections on what happened as part of that symposium as well. So to give you a bit of background on our network, we are a pan-Canadian network. We have folks who are co-op practitioners as well as folks from universities across the country, both students and academics, professors and researchers. And we're across disciplines, and I'm Erin Hancock. I'm with the Canadian Cooperative Association. I help resource this network and keep it all moving. And so we're out of Ottawa, but again, we have folks involved from coast to coast. We're funded over 5 years, from 2010 until 2015, by the Social Science and Humanities Research Council of Canada. And we're looking at different elements of the cooperative difference: social, economic, environmental. And each year we try to engage people in these dialogues about these different elements of the cooperative difference by having these free and public webinars. So we hope that you'll enjoy this webinar today, that you'll engage with us in the discussion towards the end of the webinar, and that you'll also consider attending our next webinars. So on that note, these are the 2 other webinars we have organized for this fall. So looking at cooperative identity and branding, so exploring sort of putting your co-op brand forward as opposed to just the type of businesses that you're involved with. And so we've got Georgina Wyatt from the UK, Donna Balkin, Communications Manager at the Canadian Cooperative Association, and Carolyn Hoover from .coop with the National Cooperative Business Association in the US. And we also have coming up in November the Ethnocultural Cooperatives, Race, Society, and Cooperative Emergence. And we have Jessica Gordon-Embart, who is a professor out of the City University of New York, and also Joanne Lee, who is with the University of Victoria. So we've got some really top quality speakers starting today and moving into the fall. We'll also have 3 again in the winter. So I'd like to take the opportunity now to introduce our featured speakers for today. We have Karen Miner starting off. She's the Managing Director of Cooperative Management Education at St. Mary's University in Halifax, Nova Scotia. So she's responsible for both the graduate diploma in cooperative management as well as the Master's of Management in Co-ops and Credit Unions. She has a very strong history in cooperative governance, having served on the boards of Mountain Equipment Co-op and the Canadian Cooperative Association, as well as others. She is also a certified director through the Institute of Corporate Directors, so she comes at this governance issue from many perspectives. Following Karen getting things started, we've also got Dr. Sonia Novkovich, also from St. Mary's University. She's a professor of economics and teaches within the master's and the graduate diploma programs. And she is our academic co-director for Measuring the Cooperative Difference Research Network, who's hosting this. We also, I should mention, Denise Guy, who is the Canadian Cooperatives Association's executive director. She is our principal investigator for this network as well. Sonia will be speaking today, and she is out of the Sobey School of Business, as I mentioned, and working also in the Department of Economics. Her research involves working with worker co-ops to improve their ability to operationalize the ICA cooperative principles and values through governance and management practices. And she's also the chair, just recently this summer became the chair of the Committee on Cooperative Research with the International Cooperative Alliance. So we're very proud that she's able to represent us internationally and lead the charge on cooperative research. So I'll hand it over now to Karen and Sonia.
Hi everyone, this is Karen starting things off, and we're trying to get, Aaron, you're going to give us control of the desktop. Oh, it's coming our way, so just wait 1 second and you shall see our screen with the slides. Is that working, Aaron?
Yes, it's great. Go ahead.
Great. So our agenda for the next 25 minutes or so is up on the screen. We want to give you a bit of background on the symposium that we hosted a week or so ago, and really that's the flow-through of the agenda in terms of it's tied to the blueprint at the ICA level, what themes and issues came out of the symposium on our end, and then where do we go from here. And then we'll open it up for discussion and questions. And given there are folks on the line that were also at the symposium, we want to make sure you're thinking about what you'd add to what we present. So we'll call on you to throw in a few thoughts if you have any at the end. So this just slide gives you a sense of who hosted this International Cooperative Governance Symposium, and we do cooperative management education here at St. Mary's University, which is a bit of a catch-all phrase for more than just the master's and the graduate diploma, the education piece, but we also do symposia. We're working with others to launch an international consortium of leaders in co-op management education to hopefully get more attention globally at a sector level. There was a conference part of before the summit in 2012, economics, which is a bit like our symposia concept in terms of deep diving into a particular topic, trying to make it relevant to co-ops, and research. Those are just some examples of the breadth of things we do here. In terms of symposia, there have been 4 so far. The fourth was on governance. The previous ones were on legislation and public policy was one, co-op and its workers was another, and one on accounting. So we tried to pick topics that need some extra attention, and by doing this and hosting a symposium, we're hoping that that'll help the sector explore some solutions to tough, unanswered questions, allow for input into our research here and research more broadly by co-op researchers, as well as input into training and our education agenda so that we take out from these symposia and we put into practice things that come from it. And then we get a lot of participation typically from our alumni and students and instructors in our program, and hope that it's of interest to others in similar programs or studying co-ops or business generally to learn more. And really just trying to broaden everyone's perspective while learning from experts across the co-op movement, both academics and researchers. And in this case, I had everyone stand up on day one early in the morning. I think it surprised folks that the practitioner or sector folks outnumbered the academics in the room. So we picked governance because it's been on the list and in the minds of a number of people for a while. We hadn't done a symposium in a few years, and it really is a critical element that helps to demonstrate the co-op difference. And like many topics in management and governance, there's limited research done and published, so it's an area where more is needed. And there are so many approaches to governance within our sector, since our sector is so broad, and the types of co-ops, the types of sectors, the approaches in different countries. So we thought it would be an interesting one to open everyone's eyes to the diversity out there, as well as perhaps open up at least the unanswered questions about how co-ops should do things differently in the governance arena. Not promising that we got all of the answers. And again, just a lack of training on the co-op approaches to governance. Those are some of the thoughts going through our minds in terms of why a symposium on governance. The governance symposium itself was a gathering of both the practitioner and the research audience, as I mentioned, and we wanted to have an open discussion and debate around challenges and opportunities at the global scale. It was aligned with the ICA's Blueprint for Cooperative Decade, and we will be generating a report, delivering that to the ICA as well as other audiences in the near term, in hopes that this will have some impact beyond the event. We had about 100 folks here, again, from academics, folks from within the co-ops themselves, from organizations like the Canadian Cooperative Association, other sector organizations, and governance consultants. And at the bottom, that's just a bit of a brainstorm. I probably missed a couple countries, but we had a pretty good range of countries represented. However, many more and different types of co-ops that didn't make it, but it's a good start. So I wanted to just close off what I'm going to talk about before handing it over to Sonia by just saying a tiny bit more about the ICA Blueprint and how we tied that to our symposium. Many of you may know of the ICA Blueprint for Cooperative Decade, which has been put together at the International Cooperative Alliance level. And it was great timing that this was being done and had been approved by the last General Assembly in Manchester, because because it has 5 interlocking themes, of which one is participation, and participation is where the governance piece lives. So participation in the blueprint is shorthand for the unique cooperative approach through which individuals own their cooperative and participate in its democratic governance. So we thought that it would be useful to think about how the blueprint was framing participation, and if, as the blueprint states, it's once again becoming one of the cooperative sector's most valuable assets, and it is one of the very powerful parts of co-ops in terms of how we can differentiate ourselves, that by thinking about how the ICA was framing it, we could think what our input into that would be and whether that was a useful piece of information. The picture on your screen has Jean-Louis Bancel in it. He came as a representative of the ICA. He's on the board of directors of the ICA, so it was great to have him there, and he participated in a couple of panels, as well as one of their staff members who's quite new but is helping on the implementation of the blueprint side of things. So Hanan was there, and she was able to help us make sure we were harvesting information that would be useful to the blueprint. So that's just context in terms of some of the overall framing for the symposium. Now for the hard part, because I'm handing it over to Sonia to talk more about what came out of the event.
Thank you, Karen. I hope everybody can hear me well. It is, well, my pleasure to be talking to you about the outcomes of the symposium, but I have to start with a disclaimer. Having been thinking about this and preparing for that report and other writing about it, I'm not 100% clear any longer on whether this is my take on it or whether it actually happened. So those of you who were there, please chime in with the things we've missed or interpretations of what we've heard that will come from you as well. There were many ideas and many concepts that have been flashed out over those 2 days, and I'm going to try and mention some important themes. So some of the emerging themes in cooperative governance have been that governance is directly related to co-op success or failure. We actually started the symposium with this idea. So governance is critically important for the functioning of cooperatives. Now, cooperative governance is about member control, and our participants talked about the importance of communication and how engagement and participation are 2 sides of the same coin, that we need to have engaged members, that we need to have empowered members, and that members have to be involved in the decision-making. So about, decentralization of decision-making, but ultimately about member control of their cooperative. In speaking of the current challenges that cooperatives are facing, some of our participants were talking about the necessity to think of new forms of governance. And of course, social media was on the minds of participants, but really trying to think about using new forms of participation, whether it could be virtual or symbolic. And again, this was the opening panel on day 1 that actually fleshed out some of these ideas. And then later in that day and the next day, we were talking about having deep versus shallow participation, and the difference in collaborating or again, if you're virtually participating, maybe think of that as a shallow participation rather than deep engaged face-to-face kinds of decision-making events and governance opportunities that you want your members and boards of directors and management to be involved in. But bottom line to this is really the need to find ways for our members to identify with the co-op, and that could be through symbols and building the co-op culture more generally. So the symbols idea that again was put forward by Brett Fairburn, I believe, was really taken by most people as a very important piece that they have not given enough thought to, and that in fact may be what we need to think about as we are trying to create this co-op identity or aligned member identity with a cooperative. The approaches were different. There were presenters at the symposium who were talking about concepts, so both researchers and practitioners who were engaged in more conceptual thinking and high-level thinking about what is governance of cooperatives supposed to be about and how it would be put to practice. We had some practical examples and cases and specific stories about bypassing some issues, engaging members, decision-making that penetrated down the organization and so on. And then we had presenters who came with a skill set that boards of directors needed to have and tools to assess how boards actually function and their effectiveness. So those are, pretty much three kinds of presentations that we've heard. And then Karen asked, well, were there any disconnects? And so in thinking about that, we could say that there were some disconnects between skills and assessment that apply to any board of directors. So our presenters, and generally when we talk about skills that board members need, we're talking about agency issues. So there's always two camps, boards versus management. Board is hiring management. Management has to be, watched over. So it's about accountability and so on, but also fiduciary duties of directors. So it's about legal and regulatory environment and so on. So there are certain skills that board of directors or directors on the board need to have, but that is not unique to cooperatives necessarily. It may be that some skills need to be different, and I guess we didn't spend enough time, at least in the sessions I have heard, on what are those skills that would be specific to a democratic workplace or a democratic organization, democratically governed one. The concept and the practice groups of presentations talked about the diffusion of power, the need for member control, making sure that oligarchy doesn't happen, member engagement through participation. So there are some examples. This one is from Affinity Credit Union, where elected district delegates sit on board committees, even though it's the district delegates that elect board members. But on the 20-some directors, 22 I think directors they have, the committees engage the other 130 district delegates. So there are ways and solutions in how to engage members by, again, enlarging the pool of participants in committees. Complexity was on the agenda. A number of people mentioned how the world is very complex, how co-op governance is complex, and that complexity is growing as cooperatives become larger. And network governance, therefore, is very important and probably is not given enough attention because cooperatives need to work in networks as they become large and complex. And then a number of people mentioned that rather than thinking about the conflict of interest in this polarized board versus management context, that we need to think about convergence of interest and how to govern to actually align interests of pretty much all involved members, management, and boards. So these concepts in practice, I think I have a few more lines here. Basically, again, diffusion of power. We've heard about oligarchy and how power has to be distributed through the organization. This participatory management skills and all other kinds of organizational arrangements. Member engagement. Pretty much it boils down to taking ownership of the co-op. So member engagement is required, or governance practices that will enlarge or engage members in different ways, new ways, is definitely an important topic. And again, complexity network governance I mentioned. Here I just want to add subsidiarity principle. Nobody talked about it in those terms, but it is really what it's about. And the literature brings that forward, that in the context of complex network governance, subsidiarity principle is typically what cooperatives that function well abide by, which is the decisions have to be made at the lowest possible level. And so finding the ways to deliver that is a challenge. And then we have the convergence of interest, again, revisiting the role of managers and management styles, and looking at manager as the extended hand of the board that aligned interests, where you remove conflicts, and that would be accountable to members. Emerging issues in co-op governance. Well, we've heard a lot about growth and how that's a challenge. Keeping the mission alive, so it's a challenge in that context, or in that sense, that the mission has to be front and center in growing cooperatives. Complexity, how to adapt, how to handle change, how to make sure that you innovate and are resilient to whatever changes are in front of you. The transparency was one concept that was absolutely crucial and critical in democratic governance. Networks are seen as absolutely necessary for the survival of cooperatives. And Jerry from Organic Valley was talking about the power of why. So in visioning and strategizing, he brought forward the concept of co-ops always having to ask, why are we doing this? In other words, keep the mission in front of your decisions when you're strategizing how to move forward. Risk aversion and the role of second-tier co-ops was on the agenda on the panel that discussed second-tier co-ops and networks. And basically, if our cooperatives and co-op members are averse to risk, then second-tier cooperatives can take some of that risk away or diffuse the risk. And again, the governance systems and linkages between second-tier co-ops and their governing bodies and their original member co-ops need to be set up with that in mind. So advice giving and other tools to diffuse risk are really important. In all that, education and training was mentioned repeatedly, and training of not just the board, but general management education and training is absolutely a necessity in all this. Some additional issues that we brought forward that were not probably stressed enough at the end of the symposium. The importance of staff engagement, and actually having staff as members as often as possible, multi-stakeholder cooperatives as well. So staff or labor engagement is critically important for all types of cooperatives, not worker cooperatives only, but for consumer co-ops, credit unions, and so on, because labor, or people who have the largest stake in the organization, are the best ambassadors. And so if they do not live the cooperative difference, as we call it here, then it's really difficult to try to sell it, or to talk about cooperative culture if you don't see in your daily job. So staff members are absolutely critical, and so figuring out how to include and engage labor, have labor on boards of directors, have them participate in committees and other governance bodies is critically important. Governance that would ensure the subordinate role of capital is absolutely critically important. And so not just, again, governance on the primary co-op level, but networks, creating pools of capital that is co-op specific and friendly to cooperatives is also very important. So networking to reduce risk, forming capital funds, sharing governance expertise, creating a pool of cooperative directors that can be shared among cooperatives, cross-directorships where possible. All those could be solutions to again, complex governance of large cooperatives and large cooperative systems. Examining the role of the government. Now, this is a very tricky issue that is not discussed enough. The government can be collaborating with cooperatives on values rather than as a controlling body, right? And we're talking about particularly social cooperatives or in the development context, where you have developmental states, so-called, or governments who in fact are concerned about the well-being of their citizens and who need to be partners in building cooperatives as vehicles for development. representatives sit on boards. Do they have a voice? Do they not? Is it even an option? And in some places it won't be, but in others it may be. So these are some of the additional issues we raised. And I'll leave to Karen to wrap it up with where do we go from here, and then we'll invite, of course, your input to add to what we missed. Thank you.
So for those that were at the event, you probably are now remembering how much was covered in those 2 days. For those that aren't, you're probably thinking, okay, that was a good little teaser of a lot of different topics, and how does it all fit together? I just want to, before moving to the where we go from here, because it does tie into it for me, but thinking again back to what I said from the ICA Blueprint in terms of the participation definition, because I think, and Sonia mentioned all of these key words, but what is the unique cooperative approach through which individuals own their co-ops, I would add control their co-ops, and participate in its democratic governance, and that's the own and the participate is clearly articulated as the definition for participation in the blueprint. But I'm not sure that we still yet have figured out what our agenda is as a sector for governance. There are a range of hot topics for different co-ops, for different people, different parts of the world, and we all still seem a little bit to be struggling at figuring out how to really make sure that we have governance nailed in a way that is elevating, as the words of the blueprint again, and the words of Jean-Louis Bancel over and over again. How do we really elevate the participation level within our co-ops and ensure that our members do own, control, and participate in it fully, instead of, as I often hear, us referring to member engagement or member participation, and we aren't really thinking about that as deeply as we maybe should. So in terms of our commitments going forward from St. Mary's, we are working right now on a summary report that will be available to everyone and anyone on our website, but we are specifically making sure we pass it on to the International Cooperative Alliance before their meetings in South Africa at the beginning of November, so that it can hopefully flow in and help to inform somewhat the implementation efforts around the blueprint. As well, governance will be a theme, or it will show up in next year's International Summit in Quebec City in October, so we're passing our feedback on to that group as well, and hoping it will be useful. And then I suspect there will be quite a bit of work tied back to research agendas. How does what came out inform research? What should there be more research on? Because if we know that there's needs for research on specific topics and things that were discussed, then having that input from the sector, and given there was a lot of the sector there, is useful to researchers in particular to know that they're researching things that matter. And will lead to more research and case studies, and for us feeding all of what we can into our education programs. We do teach governance broadly in some of our courses, and I can definitely see where we can do more than what we have been doing based on some of what came out next week. And I think in terms of personal commitments, I say that more in terms of, and I said this when we were launching our symposium, that the success of the symposium was really on the shoulders of everyone that came. We had a number of people on panels or making presentations, but that ended up being about a third of our participants, and everyone was there to hopefully take away ideas, have good conversations, think about things differently, and figure out what they might want to implement, research, learn more about on their end. So those were our thoughts on where to go from here. Well, I'd be curious to know if there's any other great ideas of what more can be done to not have this pick up momentum as opposed to stall. And so we're going to open it up for questions, and Erin, you'll have to say how you want to handle this part, but just lastly to say that on our website you can find the final program, access to any PowerPoint-style presentations that were made. That was really day 2 of our symposium. Day 1 were panels where there weren't formal PowerPoint presentations, but everything we have is up there. There will be a summary report posted there as soon as it's ready, a list of the registrants so you can see which organizations were represented and from which countries. So that's all there for your reading pleasure. And that's it from our end. Turn it over to Erin maybe to negotiate the question. But first we did want to get, if there are folks on the call that were there, did you have any aha moment that was missed in the broad covering of all of the various themes we felt had come out that you'd like to highlight for the webinar?
Thank you, Karen and Sonia. So what we'll do now is I'll unmute everyone's audio. And what you can do, there's an option on your menu online where you can raise your hand, and that way we can call on folks. But we do want it to feel like a dialogue here. So what I'll do is I'll unmute everyone, and if you do happen to have background noise, just press *2 to mute yourself. And if we have folks that have a response to Karen's question, we'll get started with that. So if you did attend this symposium and you felt like there were, some really neat discussions or something that stood out for you that you'd like to share, we'll go ahead and allow you to start by introducing yourself and offer your idea. Would anyone like to start? Okay. So we've got Justin Ellerby. So Justin, if you'd like to start by introducing who you are, go ahead.
Sure. Yeah, Justin Ellerby is just a student at Cape Breton University in the Community Economic Development Program there. And the big gem that I walked away from the symposium with was to actually, I'd always sort of taken for granted that more member participation is obviously the goal of co-ops, and I've struggled in the co-ops I've been part of to sort of raise that up. And then going through the symposium, I sort of realized, to the degree that our co-ops are established in sectors to provide missing services, and therefore to the extent that members may not have other options or may not have other good options besides the co-op that they're engaged in, it may be asking a lot sometimes to also then encourage people to, or demand people that they take control of this organization. And that the way that we frame that to the members is going to be very important. If they think that they're part of the co-op so they can just get access to the service, that's a very different proposition than asking them to engage. And it can also be members who absolutely already have all the capacities to participate in governance, but sometimes they also may be professionals with very limited time, very limited resources. So it just made me think a little bit more about how to make sure the co-op works for the members, and then to sort of realize that a little bit of a contradiction that can come up between providing missing service and us as leaders demanding higher participation from our members. I don't know what to do with that yet, but it was a very interesting point.
Thanks for getting us started, Justin. We've got Joel Stoddard. Joel, did you want to start by introducing yourself?
Yeah, sure. I just made a comment on the web forum. It's Joel Stoddard with Care Forest Home Health Care Worker Co-op here in Nova Scotia. And my comment was just simply more a comment than a question about one of the discussions I enjoyed being that not only is it important to focus on whether the membership and board members adhere to the co-op principles and values, but also management and CEOs of respective organizations. I felt that was a discussion that kind of came up organically, and I really enjoyed it. So that's all I had to say about that.
Thanks, Joel. We've got a question from Tom Webb. Tom, start by introducing yourself.
Well, I'm teaching the master's program at St. Mary's, and I'm just my question really was partly around where boards get expertise, whether or not they recruit experts to the board who may or may not know anything about cooperatives, but may know a good deal about, I don't know, financial affairs or reading, accounting, or whatever, or whether or not they train directors, or whether or not boards seek outside sources of expertise on topics in which they're interested, expertise that's independent of management, and how do they go about that?
Aaron, I can just jump in because I know that there was a great session, and this was the one that Joel, who spoke up as well, was part of as a presenter, where it was a few different approaches to that, case studies from different co-ops, because I think, Tom, you're probably, in some ways answering the question by asking it, because it's all of those above, and we didn't get, I guess one of my takeaways from the governance symposium was that we tried to cover so much, and by doing a symposium on governance, I thought, well, we're picking a specific topic, but it's still a topic that's so broad. I felt like, scratched the surface on a lot of different things within it, of which the training piece, assessment of capabilities of boards. There was an interesting presentation that I saw, Tanya saw some others. We divided and conquered on that day in terms of not seeing everything. They got at really sophisticated ways to try to assess your board's existing capabilities to then determine what you do need, and not taking it just from a corporate approach to that to really try to get at, what you need because you're a co-op. You still do need to plan for that, and you need to figure out whether you're going to train for that if you don't have it and you think it's important, or how you are going to get it if you are lacking it. But there was some interesting information from Kim Andres, who presented, that I felt really got at a bit of the perception versus reality sometimes of gaps, or the thought that boards, I think we've started to slide in some cases towards this idea that our boards need to be specialized, they need to be more like corporate boards, but some of the experiences she's had demonstrated that the results that co-op boards are getting often outstrip what you would think they could get, because if you look at it from a traditional point of view in terms of the skills needed, you might think that they would underperform, but they actually overperformed, or there was that really digging into what's around your board table and not having a narrow view on that.
Years and years ago, I was on the board at the time, but I wasn't just.
Did somebody mute themselves who's on the phone?
Hi there, we've got some background noise. Can you please mute yourself? Okay. Go ahead, Karen and Sonia.
If I may just add a comment, that the conclusion was...
Don't worry too much about it. I can't find it.
The conclusion to the symposium was...
One second, I'm going to mute everyone. So.
Mute everyone, Erin.
Got it. Go ahead.
Okay. Yes, conclusion about diversity was also very important. That we realized that cooperatives are very, very diverse, not just by the type of co-ops they are, but also by what works for them. And so the bottom line to it, I guess, is keep, again, your idea of what it is you're trying to do, the purpose of the co-op clear. And then, some will adopt Model A and others will take Model B, whatever works for them best, but as long as it's not creating power and removing power from the members, right, so, and keeping the purpose alive. So that was pretty much a concluding panel. The diversity is really great.
Thanks very much. We've got another question from Dan Arnett. Dan, are you there? Okay, Dan, if you want to just send me your, I've sent you a message by text. If you just want to text me which phone number you're calling from, I can unmute you. Until then, we'll go ahead and move on to the next question. So thank you, everyone, for getting this started. It's already a rich discussion. Let's move on to looking at the question that Karen raised about how do we want to continue this dialogue. So when we have something like this, a symposium, and all of these ideas are generated, Karen already declared a few things that she's going to be working on, and that the team that organized the symposium are going to be working on. Are there other things that we want to do in order to continue this dialogue or build and elevate cooperative governance and participation? So we've got, let's see, got a question from Claudia Sanchez-Bajo. Claudia, are you there on the line?
Yes.
Okay, go right ahead. Please introduce yourself to start, and welcome. It's good to have you here.
Thank you. I could not participate, unfortunately, and I am just a newcomer at the business department at the University of Winnipeg, and the chair of the new cooperative enterprise program. So I could not be there, and I would like to know if you can, if you have discussed this issue. Why is it on a strategic basis that we are discussing governance now? Is it an internal requirement or need for survival, for adaptation, for innovation? Or is it because you are seeing new requirements in terms of external reporting? I say this because at the moment, at the EU level in Brussels, they are discussing new regulations on external reporting for like startup fundings, social enterprises, where they do include cooperatives, and in particular social cooperatives. And then I also have seen PricewaterhouseCoopers and others stepping in, already doing reporting for non-profits and social enterprises in Australia, Czech Republic, and so on. So I see this coming up, and they specifically are targeting governance. So I would like to know if you have discussed this. Is it only an internal requirement or need, or is it also preparing for the upcoming external reporting? Is it clear?
Yes. Hello, Claudia. Good to hear that you're now a Canadian. Welcome. This is a very interesting point that you're making because it did not come up at all. So this was an internal push. It was really driven by the ICA Blueprint. Well, we were not driven by that. We just wanted to discuss governance as an issue of really in the context of isomorphism or cooperatives adopting governance systems of the investor-owned enterprises and not questioning enough what their identity is. So it was really more of a how do we govern to prevent the mutualization, and what do co-ops have to say about their own identity and how they actually, what kinds of governance systems are in line with an identity and culture and which ones are not. So this was driving, our the symposium, but also the ICA participation theme in the blueprint, the umbrella for to discuss it. Even though we agreed that it is not the governance is not fitting just with the participation, it also fits with sustainability and identity. So it's not just a participation theme. But what you're raising is very important, and it may actually have policy implications because if this external reporting becomes, again, pushes cooperatives in direction they don't want to go, then we will have another battle on our hands, I believe, as the cooperative sector. So this is what is your sense of it, if you'd like to comment? Is it going, are cooperatives being pushed to report in the sense of return on social investment that maybe social enterprises discuss, or do we have the space to actually propose what cooperatives and co-op governance should be about?
Thanks, Sonia. That was my what I could sense, that this is an internal thing, but I think we should bring this in and perhaps be aware of what's the external environment and therefore prepare for that in the sense of not only doing like research, teaching, and thinking, but perhaps trying to come up ourselves with a sense of like a set of principles, standards, or whatever we want or we would like to have as cooperative enterprises. In terms of what is my feeling, what I have seen so far is the old story. So let's say try to put pressure on social outcomes from let's say from the states or let's say public oversight, etc. But then on the other hand, we have a whole host of let's say investors coming in, and therefore also the consulting agencies as well. And what I have seen there is something new. That what they say is that although in principle, of course, social outcomes like from social cooperatives or let's say service cooperatives and so on, it's very important. What they would like to have, their requirements, is insider information. And this means that in the future, if, let's say, and states would agree to that. So this means that, for example, if a social co-op or a service co-op would like to get funding, they would have to hand in probably very sensitive information, not only financial reporting, but also governance reporting, and so on. So in that sense, and these, of course, investors or social investors, whatever we may call them, these are for profit. So yes, we could have a new kind of tension there, friction between, let's say, trend for profit and then still reporting on like social outcomes, members' participation, engagement, and so on. So I think we need to think about this.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Claudia.
You're welcome.
And now we have a question or comment from Dan Arnett. Dan, did you want to start by introducing yourself?
Sure. Can you hear me?
Yes, go right ahead.
Oh, excellent. Well, I'm Dan Arnett. I'm the General Manager at Central Co-op. It's a consumer grocery co-op out in Seattle, Washington. Also on the incorporating board of SLIDES, which is strengthening local independent co-ops everywhere. It's an advocacy group in the Puget Sound region. And I'm a student at St. Mary's in the master's program. I had a few comments, and it's mostly about the bullet points on diffusion of power. And I'm not going to say that it's entirely wrong in sentiment, but I'm maybe playing a bit of semantics. But I like to think a bit more about the distribution of power in co-op versus diffusion. Diffusion has a bit of an implication of weakening, and I don't think that having a weak management, weak board, or weak member ownership is good. I think they're not mutually exclusive. It's entirely possible to have all of those be weak and ineffectual, or all to be strong. So I think when we think about participation, I think about optimizing participation and thinking about the things that are idiosyncratic to the individual co-op, what kind of things might be trends in a sector or type, and how scale, scope, and context play into what participation means. And the reason I say that is when I brought this up to a lot of cooperative folks, it seems like there's more of a reactionary kind of tactical response. We could do this, or that. And I don't know if that's necessarily meaningful participation. In fact, there's been well-meaning participation efforts that have been, I think, at any pathological co-op. So I think it's important that we're strategic how we approach this. And I think it's important that we put a bit of study into what the implications are, because I think part of this dichotomy of it's an either or, but I think we can have an and here. I think it's real important. There's a lot of magic in the co-op model when you think about how ownership, use, and control is unified to one degree versus an investor-owned firm where all those things are separate. I don't know that we have to have something that is mind-blowingly different, where some of the subtleties of the cooperative model actually have profound implications. So sometimes I think we tend to overreach when we can just do a lot of more simple things really, really well, and it would be maybe lower costs and higher impact at times. So I guess the main point is I just don't like the idea of thinking about diffusion unless it's just relative diffusion for what we might see. And I also think oligarchy is not the only thing we can run into. I mean, we can very well have a mobocracy, which is at least advantage. So I think it's important we really think about that makes any sense.
Thanks very much, Dan.
That's pretty much right.
Thank you very much. We've got two more folks interested in speaking, so if we move now on to Kevin Moores. Kevin, if you want to start by introducing yourself, I'll just make sure that you're unmuted here.
Hello.
Hi, go right ahead.
Hey, Kevin Moores. I'm on the Canadian Cooperative Research Network Working Committee. I just had a question about, I guess, regarding engagement and governance and increasing engagement and governance. Did the committee at all discuss like the historical background of the cooperative movement and how politicization might be the maybe not the best way moving forward, but it was one of the more effective ways of increasing engagement in the cooperative movement. I just know, like, from Canada experience, CCF turned into the NDP, and like in the UK, it was based on economic democracy and the sort of libertarian socialism. So I was just wondering, have they discussed that? Maybe one route would be political engagement.
Karen or Sonia?
Yeah, thank you for a question. It did not come up at all in the presentations that we've had. It was not one of the subjects. So definitely a good research topic.
Thank you, Kevin. And we've got, let's go with Rick Julison. Could you start, Rick, by introducing yourself?
Sure. Rick Julison. I'm a co-op developer out in BC. And I was just curious, you mentioned that we could increase member engagement through use of symbols. Can you give some examples or what that means?
Well, I guess this is Karen. I would say that it just became a really catchy term over the couple of days. It was brought up at the get-go. An example, not specific to governance per se at the time, was just the power of the cooperative and the international logo and brand around that really caused the sector to come together. So I'm trying to think, was there a specific example that you heard, Sonia?
No, it was also, this is again Brett Fairbairn's discussion. He was talking about symbols, not just graphic and visual symbols, but also rituals and how we do things and building a culture, really, so more broadly.
Yeah, so it was a catchy term, but it also turned into, as Sonia pointed out, and then it reminds me as well, there was some conversation about culture of co-ops and being able to feel it. And when you walk in or are in a co-op, you really feel that there is a difference that runs deep. So with some of those kind of conversations, but it's something that I think needs to be fleshed out more to say, well, what does that really mean in terms of governance?
Thanks very much for your question, Rick. So at this point, I wanted to take an opportunity to share one of the things that the Canadian Cooperative Association is doing as part of this broader governance, how do we elevate governance and participation discussion, and it came out of discussions with the provincial co-op associations and with a number of our members who are involved in board education within their co-ops or offering that beyond to other co-ops. And so we created this idea of the Cooperative Governance Education Portal. And you'll see it up on your screen there. And the concept basically is that we would come up with an online space, so a hub that people would go to, that would then link out to all of the materials that are publicly available and all of the opportunities, the training opportunities and those types of things for co-op board of directors that would, even those that are private or paid for and that kind of thing, but basically to have one central spot that would allow folks to go and see what's available. And there are lots of tools and lots of publications. We'd certainly link out to the symposium, to the resources that were shared there, all of the PowerPoints and presentations that were offered, so that there can be a central spot for folks to visit when they're, serving on the board of directors of a co-op for the very first time, or whether they're doing research on cooperative governance and that type of thing. So we've had a number of folks already who have contacted us. I've put my email there, aaron.hancock@coopscanada.coop. And basically what we're asking is that folks contribute to this, because it really will be generated from the sector. And for those of you who have tools that you're willing to share, or you have presentations from training that you've offered to your board before, we'd love to include those there. And the idea is that we avoid duplication, we elevate what we do in cooperative governance, and we share some of those best practices. And by bringing it all together, we also identify where the gaps are so that we know if there's a need for new tools or new conversations around governance. So we want to flag that to you, invite you to participate in that. And we've also got we've established a working group that is advising the process of developing that over this fall, and if you're interested in that, please also email me. Lastly, I wanted to flag the 2 other webinars as part of this series that you're more than welcome to attend. If you go to cooperativedifference.coop, you can see the tab for events and opportunities, and from there you can register for free for these. We offer that you spread the word far and wide, that you include it in your newsletters, you tell other people, that we can continue these kinds of dialogues. So what I'll do after this webinar is send everyone who's attended and all those who registered links out to some of the things that Karen has mentioned and that Sonia have mentioned here today, so that you can do any of the follow-up that you want and share it with your colleagues as well. So thanks again to Sonia and Karen for not only being here today to share with us some of these very interesting insights, but also for putting everything into making the symposium happen and drawing a very diverse, very interesting audience to that as well, and for keeping us in the conversation on governance. So thanks to all of you who attended, and have a wonderful day.